The man was both a psychological counselor and an experienced investigator. He frequently appeared at various crime scenes, using his expertise to study the minds of criminals. One day, Jack received an urgent phone call informing him that his 19-year-old niece, Mary, had gone missing. Upon hearing the news, Jack rushed to his sister's house to find out what had happened. His sister explained that her daughter, who was attending school into the city of Durham, had suddenly disappeared. Although the school had already reported the incident to the police and an investigation was underway, 3 days had passed with no progress. Understanding the situation, Jack first comforted his sister and then promised to find Mary no matter what. Knowing that African Americans in Durham often didn't receive adequate attention from law enforcement, Jack decided to personally oversee the case. Early the next morning, Jack drove to the Durham police station to speak with the local police chief and get more information about the investigation. However, the receptionist informed him that the chief was in a meeting, so he would have to wait outside for further notice. Growing impatient, Jack wandered around the station and accidentally stumbled into a records room. What he saw on the walls struck him as odd. Upon closer inspection, he realized that the walls were covered with photos of missing girls. This made it clear that Mary's case was not an isolated incident. Could there be a string of disappearances in the city? At that moment, two detectives, Carl and Bruce, entered the room. Carl immediately recognized Jack's true identity and greeted him warmly. After learning why Jack was there, Carl informed him that the chief had just left the meeting to respond to a scene where a woman's body had been discovered. Concerned that it might be his missing niece, Mary, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. He followed Carl to the crime scene and took the opportunity to ask about the photos on the wall. Carl explained that the city had recently been plagued by a serial killer who had kidnapped several young women over the past few months, all of whom were around 20 years old. Among the missing girls was Jack's niece, Mary. So far, 2 of the victims had been found dead, and the body they were on their way to see might be the third. What puzzled the investigators was that the killer always left behind a note at each crime scene. The notes were signed with the name The Great Lover. The police suspected that the killer might have narcissistic tendencies, but why would the killer boldly leave behind these notes? Was this some kind of taunt directed at the police? The man discovered that all the missing girls were considered exceptional individuals in the eyes of others. This suggested that the killer specifically targeted young, beautiful, and intelligent women. Based on this, Jack deduced that the killer's motivation might not be purely to kill, but could stem from a twisted obsession. Although the police had already found the bodies of 3 victims, the sequence of their deaths did not match the order in which they had gone missing. This led Jack to believe that some of the other girls might still be alive. As for why the killer chose to murder those 3, Jack theorized that they likely broke some of the rules the killer had set for them. Jack's analysis was remarkably close to the truth. Meanwhile, a mysterious figure was lurking in the shadows, quietly watching the daily life of a girl named Anna. That night, Anna was awakened by the sound of faint footsteps. At first, she thought it might be a small animal outside, but soon after, she heard the sound of curtains being drawn. This made Anna realize that someone had broken into her home. She cautiously crept to the staircase to investigate. At that moment, an eerie silence fell over the entire house, but it was quickly broken when a large hand came out of nowhere and knocked her unconscious. Anna slowly regained consciousness after an unknown amount of time. She felt as though she had been drugged. Her mind was clear, but her limbs were completely powerless. That's when a masked man appeared before her, the very serial killer the police were searching for. Just as Jack had suspected, this man was a highly methodical and principled psychopath. After 3 months of observing Anna, he determined that she perfectly met all his criteria for abducting girls. The man told Anna that if she wanted to stay alive, she would have to follow his rules without question. After delivering this threat, he injected her with another dose of medication. The next day, Anna woke up again. This time, she found that her limbs had regained mobility, though her movements were still sluggish. Instinctively, she went to the door and began shouting for help. However, she was quickly stopped by someone who warned her that the masked man would kill anyone who tried to call for help. This revelation left Anna stunned. She realized she wasn't the only captive. There were other girls being held as well. Among them was a girl named Mary, who turned out to be Jack's missing niece. Meanwhile, news of Anna's disappearance had already made headlines, prompting Jack to begin studying the details of this new case. While he was intently reviewing the files, someone slipped a postcard under his door, interrupting his focus. Every night, the man would hide in his car, secretly watching a couple in the mansion across the street. But the woman wasn't his wife, and he had no connection to the man either. Still, he sat there until dawn, patiently waiting. Once the couple left for work, he quickly stepped out of his car, silently opened the garage, and slipped into the mansion as if he'd done it 100 times before. Without hesitation, he opened the fridge, poured himself a glass of fine wine, and sank into the luxurious sofa to enjoy his moment of comfort. After relaxing for a while, he began gathering information about the family. By going through their call logs and files on the computer, he easily uncovered a wealth of details. It turned out that the seemingly successful homeowner, who appeared to have it all, a thriving career and a happy family, had a fatal flaw. He was an alcoholic and had once caused a car accident while driving drunk. injuring both his wife and daughter. As the man stared at the family's sweet and happy photos, an evil idea started to form in his mind. This man was none other than Jack, the previous owner of the mansion. He and his family had been forced to move out after falling into financial ruin, triggered by his unemployment. But Jack couldn't accept this loss. Even though he tried to get back on his feet, he failed over and over again. Frustrated and bitter, he kicked his car door in anger, venting his growing resentment. In his moment of despair, he stumbled upon a spare key to the upscale apartment. Perhaps out of a desperate desire to reclaim his former glory, he impulsively drove back to the mansion. Watching the new couple living in what used to be his home, Jack felt an overwhelming urge to take back what was once his. During the day, while the couple was at work, Jack would sneak into the mansion. By examining the computer schedule, he discovered that the homeowner, Carl, attended an alcohol recovery meeting every week. Jack decided to infiltrate the meeting. During his turn to speak, Jack fabricated a story that mirrored Carl's experiences. Using the information he had gathered from the house, his tale immediately caught Carl's attention. After the meeting, Carl approached Jack to chat, and the two quickly struck up a friendship. But what Carl didn't know was that beneath Jack's seemingly friendly facade lay a sinister and malicious intent. The man lied to his wife, claiming he had found a lucrative project that would soon restore them to their former wealthy lifestyle. His wife was overjoyed at the news, but she had no idea that this grand plan did not include her. The next day, Jack returned to the apartment and deleted Carl's 5 p.m. reminder to pick up his daughter, syncing the updated schedule to Carl's phone. Afterward, Jack went to a bar near the school, discreetly watching the situation unfold. Soon, Carl's wife stormed into view with their daughter, furious and accusing Carl of forgetting to pick her up because of his drinking. Watching the couple argue heatedly, Jack felt a twisted satisfaction with his handiwork. Carl, frustrated and ashamed, headed to the bar, seemingly ready to drown his sorrows in alcohol. Jack silently hoped he would give in to temptation, but in the end, Carl's self-control won out, and he walked away. At the next alcohol recovery meeting, Carl shared the incident, admitting how close he had come to relapsing. He acknowledged that staying sober was even harder than he had imagined, but the experience had strengthened his resolve to stay on track. Hearing this, Jack couldn't help but feel a deep sense of disappointment. After the meeting, Carl warmly invited Jack to his home for a weekend visit. Jack immediately accepted without hesitation. When the weekend arrived, Jack showed up on time with a bouquet of flowers in hand. However, because the damaged building gate hadn't yet been repaired, Carl had to come downstairs to let him in. While Jack waited, something unexpected happened. The neighborhood gardener recognized him. Panicking, Jack quickly made up a lie, claiming he was just there to pick up some mail because his friends hadn't yet realized he'd moved out. He explained that the flowers were for his wife. Just as Carl arrived to greet him, Jack managed to send the gardener away without raising suspicion, though the encounter left a loose end he wasn't aware of. Carl warmly showed Jack around the house, proudly talking about his home. He had no idea that Jack was actually the house's previous owner. The next morning, as Carl was taking his daughter to school, the gardener stopped him. Using the excuse of delivering flowers to the girl, he slyly asked if a former resident had come by last night to pick up mail. Carl looked puzzled and said he had no idea what the gardener was talking about. Sensing Carl's confusion, the gardener quickly backtracked, saying he must have mistaken the floor. But as Carl and his daughter left, the gardener turned to the girl and gave her an unsettling, sinister smile. The girl spent $100,000 to purchase an indescribable pill. Afterward, she picked up a large needle and pierced it into her arm. When she woke up again, she found herself completely naked, lying in a morgue. As she prepared to move toward the door, she suddenly heard someone coming in. Panicked, she quickly lay back down on the autopsy table. Moments later, a judge walked in. He began checking the identity tags on the bodies, going through each one. Mary remained perfectly still, not daring to make a sound. Suddenly, the judge crouched down to adjust the wheels beneath the table. When he turned his head, he saw Mary's eyes wide open, staring straight ahead. She didn't dare blink. She held her breath and stayed completely motionless, terrified he would realize she was still alive. The judge observed her closely for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he seemed to let go of his suspicion and moved on. Once the judge left, Mary cautiously slipped off the table and crept out of the room. In another room, she found some clothes. She hurriedly threw them on, not caring how they looked, and quickly left. Mary then made her way to the evidence room, intending to steal a phone she had spotted inside. What she didn't realize was that what happened next would drag her into a nightmare. As she searched the room for her target, a forensic examiner suddenly appeared in her line of sight, startling her. Fortunately, he didn't notice her presence. Mary quickly ran back to the room she had come from and turned off the lights. However, the noise she made caught the judge's attention. Suspicious, he entered the room to investigate. Just as Mary thought she was about to be discovered, the doorbell rang. The distraction saved her, and she narrowly avoided being caught. Mary quietly followed the judge as he made his way to the surveillance room. She watched from a distance as he verified the identity of someone outside. After confirming, the judge opened a heavy iron door and handed over a thermal container to the person waiting on the other side. At first, Mary thought it was just a standard exchange exchange, but as the two men continued talking, Mary, hiding behind a wall, began to break out in a cold sweat. It became clear that this wasn't an ordinary transaction. What was inside the container wasn't food or supplies. It was human organs. The woman frantically searched for an exit, but accidentally stumbled into an operating room. Mary initially didn't want to get involved, but when her eyes landed on the tag attached to the dead man's foot, she froze. The deceased was none other than her boyfriend, Jack. The very reason she had risked entering the morgue in the first place was because of him. Earlier that day, Mary's brother and Jack had planned a robbery. However, things didn't go as planned. When it became clear they were about to be caught, her brother had no choice but to flee alone, leaving Jack behind. Shortly after, the police arrived and instructed the judge to have the body removed as soon as possible. Not long after, Mary learned what had happened. She was terrified that the police might trace everything back to her brother. Even though her brother had destroyed the getaway vehicle, Jack's phone, which contained evidence of her brother's detailed robbery plans, had been left behind. To keep her brother out of prison, Mary made a bold and dangerous decision. She would fake her death to sneak into the morgue and steal Jack's phone to destroy the evidence. Now, standing in the operating room, overcome with grief, she stared at Jack's lifeless body. But just as she was overwhelmed by sadness, Jack's eyes suddenly opened. Mary nearly screamed in shock. It was then that she noticed an IV drip attached to Jack's arm. He wasn't dead after all, but Mary knew she had no time to process this. She had to find the phone. She told Jack to stay put and wait for her, then covered him back up with the white sheet. Meanwhile, in another room, the judge took off his coat and put on surgical scrubs. Mary quietly followed him, but realized that to access the evidence room, she first needed to get the key. While the judge was distracted, she carefully took a key hanging from one of the shelves. Just as Mary was about to leave, the forensic examiner's phone suddenly rang. It was a buyer calling to say they would arrive in an hour to pick up the goods. Eavesdropping from the shadows, Mary felt her stomach drop. Jack was in serious danger. Realizing this, she rushed back to the operating room, woke Jack, and helped him up. Together, they made their way toward the back door, desperate to escape. Unfortunately, just as Mary left the room, the forensic examiner noticed that the key was missing.